Good Sunday afternoon and welcome to Rattle and Hum Sports Live. I am Brian Houston. The Dallas Cowboys lose their seventh in a row this afternoon to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in Tampa Bay. We bring on Matthew Postons of Rattle and Hum Sports. He's the Cowboys beat writer to discuss hitting a new low and I think tying the fourth longest losing streak in the history of the franchise today by losing this football game. First of all, Matthew, thanks very much for being on with us today. Hope you're doing okay.
I'm doing fine, Brian.
All right, and the other thing I will tell you, full disclosure, I was coming back from Baton Rouge where I'd gone to the LSU Arkansas game on Saturday night, and so coming back to three quarters of the ball game on radio, and let me assure you that I that's the only thing that made that palatable was being able to A, not watch it, and B, being able to listen to Brad Sham and Babe Loffenberg call it rather than having to sit through any of the network analysts because at least it made it entertaining for the drive. Beyond that, Cowboys lose 10-6, a ball game they should have won. Where do we start? Where do you want to
Uh,
start?
let's start with the fact that they've nailed down a winning formula for losing games. Their offense moves the
They've
football well
invented a
but
new
can't
way to
score
lose
points.
games.
Well, no, they move the football well, but they can't score points. Their defense plays well to start the game, but can't adjust. And then the team that they're playing comes up with a nice play at the end of the ball game to beat them. I mean, they've nailed down the formula on how to lose football games these last 7 games. So don't worry about that. They've got that down.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit. I mean, obviously, again, because I can only speak to what I heard, but the last 4 minutes of the ball game really was what this ball game was about. It was an atrocious offensive performance by both teams, based
Hmm.
on what I was listening to. Which A is astounding because the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are a terrible defense, and you would have thought that the Cowboys were going to have a lot more success offensively than they did. What was going on?
I the Buccaneers defense played awfully well today. They're not necessarily as bad as you think they are individually. They've got some very nice pieces. Levante David, Con Alexander. They've got a really good group of linebackers right now. They're a group that really, offensively and defensively, they just haven't played well collectively for most of this season. But today, even though it didn't look great statistically, there were times when they played well enough collectively to win the game. You get down into that last drive of the game, though, the Buccaneers were really cutting through the Cowboys defense. And again, we've seen this time and again during this 7 game losing streak. The defense plays well to start the game, but as the game goes on, the opposing offense adjusts. The Cowboys defense gets worn down a little bit, and they were shorthanded today with no Sean Lee, and Morris Claiborne left this game as well. So the Buccaneers kind of started cutting through them defensively. But the Cowboys nearly got out of it. They nearly forced a turnover to end the game. Jameis Winston went airborne, making a huge athletic play to try to get in the end zone on third down, but he lost the football going up. Nobody hit him. He just lost the football. Cowboys recovered it. Unfortunately, on the play, Jeff Heath, who had picked off 2 passes earlier in the game, was called for holding on that play. And we'll talk a little bit about the vagaries of NFL officiating here in just a bit. But that play gave the Bucks a fresh set of downs, and then Jameis Winston went in on a bootleg with about a minute left to give the Buccaneers the lead and the victory. Cowboys got the ball back, and they actually got a break on the return because they got a penalty, which moved them up a little bit. Ultimately, the game ended with a an interception in the end zone by the Buccaneers on Des Bryant. That play has gotten a lot of play on Twitter because there was some contact on the play. There was some contact to the back of Bryant at the end of that play that some Cowboys fans feel like should be pass interference. It wasn't called. We'll talk about that in a little bit too. But ultimately, those were the 2 plays that ultimately decided the game. Although, frankly, if you talk about what lost this game for the Cowboys, there are so many other things that lost this game for the Cowboys. They should have put 20, 25 points on this Buccaneers team today. They were playing well enough to do it at times, but we've seen it time and again. They simply don't have the consistency, and that killer instinct they had last year has completely disappeared.
Is that a confidence issue, or is it just not a very good football team?
I think some of it is confidence. I mean, when you've lost 7 games in a row, there isn't a lot of confidence to be had. But some of it's talent too, and some of it's just being without their leader, Tony Romo. They flashed up a stat during the game that going into that game, they had lost their last 8 games without Tony Romo, and that in those games, they had turned the football over 13 times. And they only turned it over once today. But you can see how much they miss him when he's not on the field. It's a completely different football team. But no, there's not a lot of confidence to go around with this football team right now. And you're not going to find a very confident football team when you've lost 7 games in a row.
No, and you probably shouldn't at this point. The thing that I find interesting about this whole thing is that based on what I was listening to there, number one, as you mentioned, the fact. First of all, let's talk about Des Bryant. Des Bryant goes off this week, an embarrassing tirade, one that Jason Garrett says the player didn't handle very well, ripping into people about what folks are saying about him on Twitter. Which, first of all, he's a professional athlete. He needs to stay off of Twitter if he doesn't like what's being said about him. But then goes out and plays. Um, Quite honestly, it was a bad ball game. He played a bad game today. He had 2 drops, one of them a critical drop, and then makes a very, I think, a poor effort on a throw into the end zone at the end of the ball game. That that kind of effort after the kind of outburst he had, he's going to get crucified this week.
Yeah, it's not good timing, that's for sure. 5 catches, 45 yards, but he was targeted 12 times. So the Cowboys gave him ample opportunities to try and make plays. And, the Buccaneers secondary is solid, but it's not anything that Bryant couldn't, overwhelm if he's playing at his peak efficiency. So I anticipated he would have a much bigger game than he had. It wasn't that he didn't have the opportunities, it's just that he didn't perform. And as you look at that play in the end zone at the end of the game, I caught a little flack for saying that it was a good no call. Well, here's what I mean by that. In the parlance of the NFL, as someone who's been around the league for 10 years, as someone who has uh, seen dozens of games officiated and has had the opportunity to interact with team officials, NFL officials, and game officials in non-game capacities and kind of ask them questions about these sorts of things. I feel pretty confident that more often than not, that play is going to be a no call. Was there contact? Yes, there was contact to Bryant's back. Was there quote unquote enough contact to draw a flag? Obviously not. And more often than not, when I see plays like that, especially at the end of the game, when officials are really just reticent to really impact how a game goes, its direction, you're going to see them not blow the whistle on that play. Now, Bryant, after the game, said flat out that he gave up on the play because he felt the contact to his back and he thought that he was going to get the pass interference call. That was bad on him. Now, he accepted responsibility for that, which I think was really interesting. You juxtaposed Des Bryant against Greg Hardy. Imagine if Greg Hardy had been in a similar situation, if Greg Hardy would have accepted responsibility for that. I don't think he would. But Bryant accepted responsibility for the fact that he gave up on the play and said that he has to do better. So I think that's a positive sign. But that tells you right there, he was frustrated because he wasn't making plays. A lot of that was on him, and that played a role at the end of the game. I felt like he should have been up in the air to get the ball before the contact even happened. Maybe that's just expecting too much in that situation. But ultimately, there was no penalty called. I think the referees, in my objective opinion, were right to swallow their whistle, and the Cowboys ended up losing the game.
Yeah, and the only argument that was made on the radio broadcast is that Babe Loffenberg said, hey, if you're going to call that play in the second quarter, you need to call that play at the end of the ball game. If you're not going to swallow your whistle in mid first quarter, when you would call it any other time, then you need to call it now.
You would love for officials to be consistent all the time. Unfortunately, there's just too much human vagary to it. The one point I'm going to make in my first and 10 column for tomorrow is this. NFL officials are the only officials in the 4 major sports that are not full-time employees. Major League Baseball umpires, NHL officials, NBA officials, they are all full-time employees. That is a year-round job. NFL officials, they have jobs during the week. In fact, it's funny. I was at the NFL Hall of Fame last week and did a tour for the first time. And you can see the list of all the NFL officials, and you can see what their professions are. You can see what they do for a living. And you're like, if Ed Hockley's a lawyer during the week, how can he really be expected to focus full time on being an official at the highest level of professional sports there is? I firmly believe that if you make officials full time employees of the NFL or however you want to do that, if that's their sole focus, I firmly believe the officiating in the NFL will get better. But when you ask these guys to be part-time officials on the weekends, you're going to see inconsistencies like that. You compare what Jeff Heath did or was called for in the hold to what happened to Des Bryant in the end zone. A couple folks on Twitter made the point that the contact wasn't much different. Well, you rewind both plays, and yeah, you got a point there. But the fact of the matter is, one official called it on Heath, one official didn't call it on Bryant. You can say it's Cowboys bias all you want, but at the end of the day, it still led to a loss for the Cowboys, and it's not the only reason they lost the game.
And we got to go back to Jeff Heath for a moment too. The Cowboys have been dying for turnovers all year long, and they get two interceptions from Jeff Heath. But then, you think Jeff Heath, who's not exactly, he's not a favored son of Cowboys watchers who've watched him, play pretty poor safety over the first 2 years of his career, then commits a critical penalty when Winston had scored on the first time, and what it looked like had fumbled the ball, and it looked like the Cowboys were going to recover and be able to hang on for a win. He barely touches the receiver and goes from hero to goat just like that.
Yeah, it's a shame because he had such a good game. Being in the right place at the right time twice. Both of those interceptions were off tipped passes, and one of the things that NFL defensive coordinators and secondary coaches really harp on is, once the ball is in the air, you know, keep your head on a swivel and be aware of what's happening, especially if you're a safety, because you never know when a ball might come off a receiver's hands and come your way. And both of those times, Heath was Johnny on the spot and really made great plays. And those were huge interceptions too, because they killed drives where the Buccaneers were potentially knocking on the door of scoring points. The hold, yeah, I mean, there wasn't a lot of contact there. The fact is, though, players time and again are going to try to get away with a little bit here and a little bit there. They're going to push the envelope a little bit. They're going to try and do everything they can to keep a player from getting in position to make a play. Sometimes you push that envelope and the referee doesn't tear it. Sometimes you push the envelope and the referee does tear it. In that situation, the referee tore the envelope. It's really unfortunate because Heath had a really good game today. But you know, if you want to avoid any, if you want to limit your ability to get called for a penalty, then don't hold. That's all you can do. Don't even have the appearance of holding. I said this. I wrote this in an article earlier this week about something else. I don't think it was about the Cowboys, but about something else. If you want to avoid being called for a penalty, well, then avoid the appearance of committing a penalty.
You're always so hard to get along with. I just want you to know that,
I
by the
know.
way.
I
You
am.
have such high expectations. Excuse my lighting here. I apologize. This is not studio lighting here, and I'm not red, but it seems that way today. Um, the Cowboys offense. One of the things we've talked about all year long is that obviously without Romo, their offense has struggled, but their running game was atrocious today. You care
Hmm.
to
It
comment
was.
on what the heck happened there?
Yeah, for the first time in 4 games, Darren McFadden was really limited in what he was able to do from a rushing standpoint. You know, Buccaneers front four isn't bad. They've got some good players. You look at Gerald McCoy inside. They've got some decent pass rushers. They got a little more pressure on Matt Castle than I was expecting in this game. Ultimately, this was it really felt like such a disjointed game from an offensive standpoint on both sides of the ball because it seemed like everybody was moving the ball in fits and starts. Everybody had to settle for field goals early in the game, and I think it kind of set the tone for what everybody did offensively. As for not getting the push up front, the Buccaneers did such a good job, I think, of filling the rushing lanes. More than I think the previous 3 teams the Cowboys have played, especially with their linebackers. Their front four did enough to stand up the offensive line and to create enough seams for their linebackers to get into position to keep McFadden from really getting rolling downhill in this game. Um, there have been some times in the previous 3 games where McFadden looked like a freight train, frankly, coming down the track. He didn't get an opportunity to gather a lot of momentum today. I think the Buccaneers really had more to do with that because they did a good job of standing up the Cowboys' offensive line, creating lanes for their linebackers, and limiting Dallas's ability to run the football down the field.
What has happened? I understand what you're saying, but what happened to the
Yeah.
best offensive line in football?
Well, I think they're still one of the best lines in football. I just don't think they're playing at that level, and they've really not consistently played at that level all season. I think if you look at their 9 games to this point, and you judge solely by the running game, their best performances have come against the New York Giants and came last week in their loss to Philadelphia. When you look at the running game production, when you look at the pass production, I think their pass protection's been solid. I think Romo was able to take advantage of that protection for the game and a half he was, upright. I think that they've done a solid job of protecting Brandon Weeden and Matt Castle. But I think ultimately they just haven't been the dominant group, and I think it's more uh, execution than anything else at this point. And I also think too, I think you got to look at it from the standpoint of this is the same group that the Cowboys had last year, which means that every team in the NFL has tape on these guys as a group from last year, which means they can scheme a little bit differently than they might have a year ago. They've had 6 months to adjust to this group in the offseason, and that always makes a difference when you're trying to scheme against a team, especially twice a year like Philadelphia or Washington or the New York Giants. I think they're still playing at a solid level. They're just not playing at the high level we saw last year. And you can make a case too that for the first 6 games of this year, the Cowboys did not have a back in place that could really take advantage of what they could do, like Darren McFadden has.
Another area that we usually hammer on the return game or the kick coverage, but today the kicking game really let them down in terms of a missed field goal. First of all, by a guy that just doesn't miss field goals very often. How does that happen? Sorry, having browser issues. My apologies. We have a little technical issues there, so I'm back. Mentioned the fact that they missed a field goal today. That never happens with the Cowboys
No,
missing. So they've got maybe the most dependable kicker in the league, but he missed a big field goal today that might have made a difference in the ball game. As it turns out, it wouldn't have because they lost by 4. But that, and then you have Chris Jones with the punt there at the end of the ball game, a poor punt that gives Tampa Bay the ball at the 45-yard line on a short field, and then they take it the length of the field and score at the end of the ball game. The kicking game, I mean, this is a total team effort. Everybody sucked.
yeah, you could say that what's been happening with the offense and the defense has been permeating over to the special teams group for a few weeks now. It's unfortunate that punt by Chris Jones at the end of the game because really for the last few weeks he's been one of their most consistently good players. He's really helped them, win the field position game for the most part the past month. It's just the Cowboys have not been able to take advantage of it either offensively or defensively. Beasley had a couple of nice returns today. I think he's finally settled into that role of being the punt returner, and I think he's finally comfortable with it. They still need a spark in the kick return game. They're not getting what they need there, unfortunately. But overall, this special teams group, which was solid to above average for the Cowboys last year, not there this year. And you're right, Dan Bailey missing a field goal. I can't remember the last time he actually missed a field goal. It's like seeing Bigfoot in the wild. And there were a lot of Bigfoot moments today for the Cowboys. Christian Michael carried a ball once. Gavin Escobar caught a pass. Devin Street caught a pass. A lot of Bigfoot sightings today for the Cowboys, but it really ultimately didn't lead to anything.
Okay, and then they also had a major eight catches, 126 yards. Didn't score any touchdowns, but they had no answer for him. And they also had a lot of people going down in the secondary. Claiborne had to play. He didn't play the second. What did he go out? Third quarter? Or did he ever
Late
come?
first half he went out. I believe he went out late first
Okay,
half.
and didn't come back.
Yeah, he did not come back. So yeah, Mike Evans, he's a talented young receiver. I've
He's a
been following
beast.
along with him. He really is. When he's on, he's on. And he actually had some moments today where he wasn't catching the football. He had 2 or 3 drops, and you kind of almost sensed it was kind of getting into his head. But he still ended up having a really good football game for the Buccaneers today. One thing you can say about this Tampa Bay team is they've got some weapons. And they needed Mike Evans to step up today because Vincent Jackson was out. Austin Seferian-Jenkins was out. Their talented offensive tackle Ellie Marpet was out. Um, they were missing some talent on the offensive side of the football, and they needed somebody to step up and make some plays. And Mike Evans was able to do enough for them to help them win the game. You're right; they kept him out of the end zone, which is good. And he's a big target, so you feel pretty good when he doesn't score a touchdown. But he was able to do enough to help them set up that touchdown late in the game.
Okay, I got to throw one other thing out there at you. Today, broadcast wise, I think it happened today, but I know it's been done before, and I'm trying to take this off the screen. Terry Bradshaw has become very outspoken about Jason Garrett and the fact that he feels like he ought to be fired. And are we going to hear more and more of that kind of stuff now?
Well, I think anytime you have a team that's 2-7, I think you're going to start talking about the head coach and start talking about his staff. Um, Personally, I don't think there's any reason to fire Jason Garrett after the end of the season. You know, Aside from the fact that he's had to deal with the loss of their quarterback, the loss of Des Bryant for several games, the whole circus that is Greg Hardy. Um, there's just the natural connection with Jerry Jones. Jerry Jones wants this guy to succeed. He wants Jason Garrett to be successful, and he's going to be as patient as possible. Now, you could sit there and say, hey, Jerry Jones gave you Greg Hardy. Jerry Jones gave you these pieces in the off season to go along with what you already had to make you a winning football team. And certainly there's accountability there for Garrett, for Marinelli, for Scott Linehan, for the entire coaching staff. But in terms of being in danger of losing his job, maybe if they lose out the rest of the season, which I don't anticipate them doing with Romo coming back next week. But you know, certainly, a losing season this year, I think would put Garrett on the clock a little bit. But, I expect Jerry Jones to be ultra patient with Jason Garrett. He really wants this to work. He really wants Garrett to be the guy that gets him back to the Super Bowl. And, if anything, a season like this might actually embolden Jason Garrett to be a little more vocal in the room in the offseason, because I'm not sure how much he had to do with bringing Greg Hardy to Dallas. Personally, I don't know how much he had to do with that. Greg Hardy certainly isn't his kind of guy. This could be a pathway toward Garrett being a bit more vocal in their room in terms of scouting and drafting in the offseason.
One thing that absolutely seems to be happening, though, this looks like a TO moment where Jerry Jones, despite all protests by everybody in the organization, decided to bring Terrell Owens in, and he came in and did what Terrell Owens is always going to do. He's going to be a cancer in the locker room, and sooner or later they had to run him off. And now you see Greg Hardy come in. I'm not going to say he's a cancer in the locker room, but he's obviously a distraction. He's also a bit of a nutcase, as we saw on the sidelines today, as he was getting into it with another defensive lineman over assignments. But that starts to permeate when you're losing games, and you got a guy like Greg Hardy who's a nut job to begin with, and it takes a full-time babysitter to keep him under control. And then you have Dez getting emotional, and it takes a full-time babysitter to keep him under control. That's more than any one head coach, I think, can handle when you're also trying to coach the team. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And if I like what Troy Aikman said earlier this week. He was being asked on the ticket about the Greg Hardy situation and about when Jerry Jones might cut bait on Greg Hardy. And Aikman basically said, well, as long as he's productive, Jerry will tolerate pretty much anything that you can dish out. You talked about Terrell Owens. Yeah, he was a cancer, but he was a highly productive cancer for about 2 seasons, and that's why the Cowboys tolerated him. Right now, Greg Hardy is their most productive defensive end in terms of sacks and in terms of getting pressure on the quarterback. He wasn't today. He was not today.
He was awful today.
But he's been their most productive pass rusher, which is a whole other problem right there. But as long as he's productive, Jerry will tolerate him. The problem is Jerry doesn't coach the football team. Jason Garrett does. And I think Jason Garrett has a low tolerance for this kind of stuff. I think he's willing to tolerate Des Bryant a lot more because, really when you consider what Bryant does, the production around Des Bryant, he's much more easily controlled by a coaching staff or a franchise than Greg Hardy is. Des Bryant's problem is he gets too emotional and he flies off the handle at players a little bit. and maybe it sometimes damages his effort on the field. Greg Hardy, it's a completely different issue. It's one of those things that could alter the direction of the franchise if things go the wrong way with Greg Hardy. So, it's not been an easy coaching job for Jason Garrett this year. I dare say things might be a little better if Greg Hardy weren't here, even if the production's not there, because you're not dealing with the circus from week to week. Like you mentioned, Garrett's had to sit down with this guy 4 times and say, dude, this is not how we do things. How many more times does he have to do that before Jerry Jones finally says, well, we're going to get rid of the guy? Well, if Greg Hardy has 10 sacks at the end of this year, I can almost guarantee you they're not getting rid of the guy.
All right, so now we go to the 2-7 part of this. The Cowboys get Tony Romo back next week, but they weren't able to do what the most that we could hope for was to, we all thought maybe if you could just tread water, maybe if you could just win 3 games, maybe if you could just win 2 games. Well, they've won no games in the 7 games that Romo's been gone. So now what happens? Romo comes back next week against the Dolphins. Is this season lost?
In my opinion, it is. I mean, you could sit there and make a case that there's a
And we're going
possibility
to, I'll tell
because,
you what we'll do. We will take Matthew off. We'll All right, Matthew, you there?
yeah, I'm here.
Okay. Sorry, we apologize for the technical difficulties. Romo comes back now after 7 weeks out. What happens
Yeah.
now?
Well, I think they'll do what they can to salvage the season. I think Romo will come back, and I wouldn't be too surprised if he actually comes back and plays at a pretty high level next week against Miami. But ultimately speaking, you're asking this Cowboys team to win really, 7 games to end the season, and I just don't think they can do it to finish 9-7. Now, there are going to be some people out there that are going to say, hey, if the Giants lose to the Patriots tonight, and that game's going on right now, they'll be 5-5. The Eagles lost today. The Redskins don't have as great a record as you might think right now. The Cowboys really are only 2 games out of the NFC East. Well, forget about it. This team can't sustain anything. They put together good effort on the field, but they can't sustain it for 4 quarters. I don't know if Romo might be able to change that from an offensive standpoint, but I don't know that he can change it from a defensive standpoint. And their schedule is just too difficult down the stretch. Miami, Carolina, Green Bay on the road, Buffalo on the road, in the winter, in December. It's going to be cold. Washington twice, once on a Monday night in Washington. It's going to be cold. The Jets at home. No, they can't win. I don't think they can win 7 games in a row to get to 9-7. I'm not even sure they can go 6-1 to end the season, to be honest with you. I think they're playing out the string. I think they missed the playoffs. I think they get a halfway decent draft pick out of it. And then your window of opportunity with Romo as your quarterback, closes just a little bit more going into 2016.
Honestly, though, after seeing what's going on with this Cowboys team, this um, and I just want to make sure you can still hear me.
Yeah, I
Can you
can.
still hear
I
me?
can.
Okay,
Yep.
we're buffering for a moment. This team, there's so much more wrong with this team right now than the absence of Tony Romo. That this is not even a shell of the team that was on the field last year against the Green Bay Packers in the playoffs when they went 12-4 and came within a catch no catch of advancing to the NFC Championship game possibly. They have so many holes again. It looks like we're gone back to the season before when they were 8-8 again, and you're wondering whether they're going to go, straight to hell or whether they're going to actually get better again.
Yeah, I mean, this did not go as planned. I think from a Cowboys perspective, from a fan's perspective, from anybody's perspective, I don't think anybody expected the Cowboys to be 2-7 at this point in the year. And you're right, it's not all on Tony Romo not being on the field. There are a lot of different factors that are there, and perhaps there have been some times I've seen teams in the NFL take a step back to take a step forward the next year. I think that's kind of where you're hoping the Cowboys are going at this point. Hopefully, this shows them, hey, we need a true backup slash starter of the future at quarterback. We need more help at running back. We need more help at defensive line, more pass rushing help. They've got to find a successor to Sean Lee because who knows where Lee's career is going to go after 2 concussions in 6 weeks. There are a lot of things that are wrong with this team, and you can only fix so many of those things from year to year. Cowboys did have a pretty solid draft this year with Byron Jones. He's really proven to be a wonderful addition to their defense. But they've still got a lot of things they have to fill, and they're going to spend the next 7 or 8 weeks trying to figure that out. For some of these players, it's an audition for next year, especially for a guy like a Morris Claiborne or a Brandon Carr who carries a big salary figure that they could save some money by cutting him. Yeah, there's some guys that at this point in time are now auditioning for next year as opposed to trying to help this team make a playoff push. They're going to talk about it. We still got a chance, yada yada, but realistically, there's no shot for this team to make the postseason.
Sorry about that. More internet issues. Sorry about that. We apologize. All
No
right. Well,
problem.
based on the fact that the season is lost now, and I
Bye
mean, it
bye.
basically, I mean, there's just, I'm with you. They're 2-7. As Bill Parcells says, you are what your record says you are. I
Yeah.
personally don't believe that Tony Romo can come back in and save this season because I think the problems on defense continue. They can't make a play when they have to on defense. They can't make a stop when they have to have it. And they played a pretty good defensive game today, or Tampa Bay's offense was just dreadful, whichever way you want to look at it. You only give up 10 points,
Yeah.
you should win a ball game.
They've
But
played they've played good defensive games really the last month. They just haven't been able to
well,
finish it.
that's the thing I'm talking about, though. I mean, they've led in every ball game at halftime, haven't they?
Mhm.
Since
Uh,
Romo's been out, I think they've had the lead in at least five of those ball games.
they have had either a lead or they have been within 7 points of the lead entering the fourth quarter of 6 of the 7 losses in this losing streak. The only game where they
Yeah,
were
the
truly out of it by
Patriots
the fourth
game.
quarter was the New England game. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they're
So
they're,
so
they're just
they've
not
had a
finishing
chance.
games.
Well, and that just, for one thing, that shows you how little margin for error there is in the National Football League. But
Hmm.
the bottom line is, every week it's a different thing that's caused them to lose this football game. Every
Yeah.
week it's been something. The one thing that's been consistent is that when they've had to have a stop, when they have had to have a stop on defense, they have never gotten it in this seven
Yeah.
game streak.
Yeah, and we talked about the margin for error after Romo got hurt. You talked about the NFL. In the NFL, there is a very slim margin for error. It gets even slimmer when you lose your starting quarterback. So yeah, all of those things get magnified. The fact that the defense can't get the offense off the field in key moments, the fact that you have guys that are dropping passes, the fact that your offense, which was one of the better third down and red zone conversion units in the NFL last year, can't get in the end zone inside the 20 and can't always convert on third down like he did last year. All of those things conspire to put a team in a position where they can lose 7 games in a row without their franchise quarterback. Tony Romo is not going to fix a lot of this, but he can fix some of this, and he can at the very least improve their margin of error a little bit.
Well, let me ask you about the credibility of this franchise, though. And let's say they go, 3-13 with Romo coming back. Then what does Jerry Jones do? Because that's a very real possibility with this schedule and the way this football team is playing right now and the lack of confidence it has.
Well, I tell you what I would do if I were in his shoes. I'd blow the thing up because you've got enough older players now that still have some value to trade that you might look for a buyer for Tony Romo, maybe for Jason Witten, maybe for a couple of other guys, and start rebuilding this team because that pretty much shows you right there that it's not just an injury issue to your franchise quarterback. It's a we don't have enough talent to be competitive kind of issue. I'll tell you what Jerry Jones will do. He's going to keep Romo. He's going to keep Witten. He's going to keep all these other guys. He might sign Greg Hardy to a long-term extension because he feels like he has to. He's going to go out and try and find some guys in free agency, even though they don't have a whole lot of cash to spend. Try and draft up some guys that can help them immediately and take another run at it. because he's committed to finding a way to get Tony Romo as deep as he can in the postseason until Romo's career is over with. Jason Garrett, Jerry Jones isn't just going to, you know, blow the team up like some folks would like him to at this point and just start over. That won't happen. So regardless of their record, Jerry Jones is just going to keep pushing on and doing whatever he wants to do to try and improve this team.
Well, unfortunately, blowing the team up really is not an option because the large majority of your team, your offensive line, your receivers, a lot of your defense, they're still pretty young guys. Unfortunately, the most important player on the field is one of your oldest players, and one of your best other players is your tight end, who is having a Hall of Fame career, but he's not going to play much longer either. No. And those two guys are irreplaceable in the immediate future. You're not going to just blow the. There's nothing to blow up there. I mean, you've got to hit on a franchise quarterback in the draft next year, or you're just going to waste all these young guys now who are on this team. You got to decide which of these guys can play. But one thing we do know is that they have zero depth right now at linebacker. They've just about run out of linebackers. Yeah. I don't know who you keep from the secondary because there's nobody that I think should be insured of a job in the secondary. Is there anybody you see that just absolutely is a can't lose kind of guy in the secondary anymore?
No, nobody. I mean, I think Byron Jones might actually be the closest, and that's just because you've got control of him for 3 years with his contract, and he's so versatile. But as far as the other guys in the secondary, no. I mean, you could cut Brandon Carr and Morris Claiborne. I fully expect both of those guys to get cut in the offseason and go after other guys. Safety, Barry Church is a nice player, but he's not a world-class safety, and they could probably do better. J.J. Wilcox may not be here past his first contract, and Jeff Heath certainly won't be here past his first contract. So it's not a very good secondary. You're absolutely right about that.
So they've got a lot of holes to fill. There are a couple of things, too. I will tell you this one, just very briefly. To his credit, Rolando McClain actually showed up and played like a paid player today.
He did. And, I find it funny that the only time that McClain seems to have a good game is when Sean Lee isn't on the field. I can't figure that out because at the beginning of the season, I kind of felt like Sean Lee or Rolando McClain on the field at the same time. Well, that's going to be something else to see right there. But when Lee's on the field, McClain almost disappears. But when Lee is out today, like he was today, McClain steps up and has a really good game. You got to get these two guys on the same page, playing that way at the same time for this defense to take a step forward.
Yeah, that's the way it goes. Well, obviously, this is there's no other way to say it. It's a bad football team right now. 2-7, you're a bad football team. Whatever the reasons. And at this point, I think that this is more than Tony Romo's return is going to be able to help them recover. I just can't see Romo making that big a difference, considering all the flaws they have defensively in the running game. Yes, and the fact that 7 weeks without playing.
Yeah, he won't cure everything. I mean, he'll put a Band-Aid on some things the next few weeks just because of his sheer ability, his sheer talent, and the fact that he can do some things in the fourth quarter that very few other quarterbacks can do. But no, he's certainly not going to put a Band-Aid on the defense. He can help out the defense by putting more points on the board and giving them more of a margin for error. But no, he's not going to come and fix half of what's wrong with this team right now.
All right, well, Matthew, what if as you dip out there to take another shot of whatever it is you're another blast of tequila after watching that game today? I'm guessing.
Well,
you can tell I've been in Baton Rouge for the weekend, right?
Exactly.
Briefly, what's coming up on Rattle and Hum Sports, the website?
Well, I'm working on my 1st and 10 column for tomorrow. We'll talk a little bit about the officiating we talked about earlier. And some other things that popped up in the game, and then we'll start getting ready for the Miami game. I'll be in Miami for that game on Sunday afternoon, so that should be a really interesting experience. I haven't been to the Dolphins game in about 10 years, so it'll be Romo's first game back, of course. I would expect there will be a large contingent of Cowboys fans in the building, and It should be an interesting game to see if Romo can come back and make any kind of difference to this football team.
So if you do go to Miami next week, you're actually going to waste time going to a football game?
Yeah, why not? I'm going to waste time going to, I think, let's see, four. Four
Oh,
of them, actually.
wow. Dude, you seriously need another tour guide, okay?
Well, they're not all Cowboys games. Don't worry.
No, I'm not. I'm talking about football in general. If you're going to Miami, I mean, the Miami people don't go to the football games.
No, well, actually, there'll be college games in Orlando, Tampa, and Orlando. I'm actually going to
Yeah.
the Bethune-Cookman Florida A&M game Saturday
Oh,
afternoon. That should be really
okay.
interesting. I'm looking forward to that.
That should be very interesting, no question. Well,
Yeah.
Matthew, great talking to you as always. Wish we could talk about something happier than yet another Cowboys loss, but it does keep it interesting. So thanks very much for
Yeah.
coming on with us, and thanks for hanging with us during some of the glitches too.
All right. Thanks, Brian.
All right, thanks a lot. That's Matthew Postins covering the Cowboys on Rattle and Hum Sports. You can check out all of his writing on rattleandhumsports.com. You can watch this and other spreecasts on Rattle and Hum Sports as well. I'm Brian Houston. Thanks very much for watching, and we will talk to you next time.